Welcome to the live stream recording of the Outlaw Radio Show. This is a radio show that we record 4 blocks of audio, 14 minutes, 12 minutes, 11 minutes, and 9 minutes and 45 seconds. Once we've completed recording those blocks of audio, we send them to his productions, who produces it down for our wonderful radio partners. Again, Outlaw Radio Show is a nationally syndicated show, so it gets formatted, put on a server for all the radio stations to download and air. Once that happens, we then take those audio files back, we condense them down, edit them down, and release it as a podcast. So every episode of the Outlaw Radio Show is podcasted in its entirety. What you're watching is the recording of the show. And so a few months back, we decided to start live streaming the recording. It enables us to interact with you, the audience, and kind of just expands our platform, our reach. I am joined, and this is what's fun about the live stream, I'm joined by Creighton Vaughn, my brother, who is kind of the man behind the live stream itself. He's behind both the feed on Facebook and YouTube. And I'm also joined by Nick and Dill Daddy Derek, who today will be affectionately called Darius.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey, how's it going?
So is that
Do I have to have an alternate speak?
Is that
Darius? Darius talk like this.
Is that Darius's voice?
No, I don't know. I feel like he's just kind of normal. He talks like this.
I really like the idea of Darius talking like that.
So you got to kind of give everybody
right.
an understanding of who Darius is.
So we went camping, and our great elder Joe, he mistakenly called me Darius for the first night that we were there, and that's how I earned my name, Darius. First night we were there.
So Joe, who is frequently referenced on at least the live stream,
Old Joe.
Wise man Joe.
Hi, man.
the elder.
Hey, guy.
Hey guy.
He's the elder of the elders at Calvary 316, which is the church that I pastor. And so you guys, a bunch of y'all went camping, and Joe Joe recently went through what I call a 3-quarter life crisis,
That's a good way to put it.
and ended up buying himself an old Jeep and got mud and tires. And so all the young guys in the church took him camping. And you're saying for the first night he messed up your name and called you Darius instead of Derek.
For the whole night. Well, through the day he was fine. At the night, no, my name was Darius.
It was wonderful.
It was great.
And everyone kind of just embraced it, and just you became for the weekend you became known as Darius.
Yep. And
I also want to point out that it's not just mud and tires; it's also on a lift kit.
Yeah.
So it's not just like it has bigger tires on it. It also sits like 6 inches higher than a normal Cherokee.
Probably
for
with the bigger tires.
It's wonderful.
So you guys went camping and had fun, and Derek came back known as Darius.
New man, Darius.
So from time to time, this will be like a Marshall Mathers, Eminem, Slim Shady type dynamic that Derek's alter ego, known as Darius, might make an appearance, and so you'll know clearly who's here. So today, this will be Darius, right?
Yep.
Yeah,
Darius all day.
We're doing everything we can to make this show as awkward as possible. I think we're succeeding.
We have a good cast for it.
We
Well, that is true.
So Creighton, let everybody know, just kind of the audience, if they'd like to interact, kind of how to do that and the benefits of it.
All right. So your best bets are the Facebook chat or the YouTube chat. If you text me, you will be ignored. But yeah, Facebook or YouTube, send it in the chat if it's something that is good or fits well with what we're talking about. Or if you're Pastor Bob and you say hi, you get a hi, Pastor Bob.
Pastor Bob, as always, the man, the myth, the legend.
Yes. So yeah, send your chats. If you have any questions, comments, if you have concerns about something that Zach said because it was crazy, we understand. Let us know.
Nick, what's your role? What is your role here on the live stream?
My role, mainly, listen well, and then insert what the audience might feel or have a thought about what's going on in the topic wise. Try to bring it up. Try to discern it as much as I can and bring it to your attention or the attention of the audience and get further explanation on that.
I have a friend whose name is Wayne. I won't say his last name.
What's up, Wayne?
His name's Wayne. He's an old country guy. Drives an old beat up antique, rusted out pickup truck, and
On its fourth motor.
yeah, with a bunch of chainsaws and whatnot in his back. He ended up calling me on what day was it? Sunday or Monday? I forget what day. Today's Wednesday, so
It is.
it was
One
Sunday.
of the days before this.
He called me Sunday and is trying to apply for the PPP loan. But his bank keeps telling him that he has to do it online. And he's like, but I don't have the internet. Like I don't have online. I don't have online. Like I've got a phone, and he tried to do what they were asking him to do. That stays on. That's our air conditioning. No, leave that going. That's our air conditioning.
So back to being awkward. That was nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, we got guys working on the air conditioning that, like, I'm an amateur. We need the AC. It'll get hot in here. Anyway, he reached out and was like, hey, Zach, can you help me? Like, I need the interweb. And I need to get this application, and I'm struggling. And I was like, hey, come on over Monday night. I got baseball practice. Come over late, and I'll sit there, and we'll log on to the interwebs, and we'll get you set up. So he came over and came into the studio, the office, and when he walked in, he goes, what in tarnations? He's looking around like, what are you doing in here? So I told him, and he was like, this is the coolest room ever. Interestingly enough, though, his credit union had shut down the portal, and everything we tried failed. And it really just was another example of government inefficiency, and was just tragic and terrible. And then Tuesday, we tried all day to try to log into this portal, and it's amazing how inefficient it all is. But anyway, I thought the compliment about the studio was nice. So we're going to do this. The first block of audio is 14 minutes. You guys have anything to add before we dive in?
I have a question.
Yes.
Am I on this episode?
Yes, I think. Just
Wunderbar.
I'll keep you on your toes.
You know me. I love being on my
Oh, yeah.
toes. Love not knowing what happens next.
It makes you not as short as you would be otherwise.
Okay, you're 5'6".
14, but when I'm around you, I feel tall, which is nice. Like one of the few black friends I have, I'm taller than, and can probably jump higher. I'm gonna say
I don't know. Let's run it right now. Right now.
right
Let's
now.
run it.
You know
right
what?
now.
You know what? It's fine. I can swim better.
You
than
can totally swim. No, I swim like a rock. So completely understood.
I know that firsthand.
Yes. Yeah.
Still got that cut on
I
your
still
foot.
got a scar. Anyway, we're gonna do this 14 minutes, fellas. 14 minutes, first block. I'm gonna get some music going. There we go. Get that rolling. All right. Darius, you still with us? You still with us?
Yeah.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. My name is Zach Adams, and I pastor a church located just outside of Athens, Georgia. The name of the church is Calvary 316. If you happen to be local and you know where Highway 316 is, let me invite you to be my guest one Sunday. Our service is at 10:30 a.m. If you're not local, but maybe you're looking for a good church that you can watch online, you're still living in one of those areas of lockdown, you can attend digitally. Our live stream happens again same time, 10:30 a.m. The easiest way to watch is our YouTube channel, Calvary316.live, or on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/Calvary316. I do hope wherever you're listening or however you're listening, whether you're listening on one of our wonderful radio partners, or maybe you're listening through our podcast. Every episode of the Outlaw Radio Show is podcasted in its entirety. So if you are listening on the radio but can't stay with us for the hour, that's okay. Download the podcast. It's on Apple, Google, Spotify, really all the podcasting platforms. Download it, subscribe, listen to where you leave off. Again, this episode, what you're listening to, is podcasted in its entirety. I would also invite you, if you're listening, that you can watch the live stream recording of the Outlaw Radio Show Wednesday nights at 8 p.m. So if you're listening on radio, there's about a 2 or 3 week delay. The podcast is about a week delay, but you can actually watch the recording of what you're listening to live on YouTube or Facebook Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/The Radio Outlaw. Again, Facebook/The Radio Outlaw. Or check out our YouTube channel, which is outlawradio.live. Again, outlawradio.live. And please be a subscriber. So whether you're listening or you're watching, I do hope that you stay with me over the next hour as I seek to deconstruct the negative perception that the world has of Christians by boldly discussing relevant topics in what I like to think to be an honest, genuine, and biblical way. I am joined every week, always here, very rarely heard, my partner in crime, Creighton Vaughn. Creighton, welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show.
Thanks for having me, Zach. How y'all doing out there?
So your role is, in addition to just being here so that I have someone to talk to, as opposed to just ranting to my refrigerator, you give me a face to look at and speak to. You have multiple roles when it comes to Outlaw Radio. You want to just elaborate briefly to the audience, and then also plug the live stream.
So I am intermediate interjection, as well as I man the live stream. It runs through my computer. I make sure that it's up, running, that the YouTube comments and Facebook comments are set on the air if they're good enough. Speaking of which, our live stream is at Outlaw Radio on YouTube and Outlaw Radio on Facebook. We stream Wednesday nights, as he said. It's awesome. You get to see me. You get to see my friend Nick and my friend Darius. And
also, AKA Deal Daddy Derek.
Yes, he goes by many names.
Many names. But that's what's kind of cool is between the blocks of audio, maybe the audience is listening to, we have a conversation, not just you and I, but the aforementioned Nicholas Monty and Derek Kennedy. Some friends of ours are in the studio. They're mic'd up. But instead of being on the radio, their input is kind of reserved for the live stream itself. And as a group, we're able to have a continued conversation between the blocks of audio before the show, after the show, And I think it's very edifying and entertaining all at the same time. So,
yeah, they have a lot of perspectives that sometimes we don't have, especially when you're doing your thing. They sometimes throw in some stuff from right field that you don't expect,
which tends to add color and texture to the show, which is always important.
It's a good time all around.
Last week, we started what I prefaced and was clear to be a two-part episode. The subject matter, if you'll recall, was about political middle ground, which is something that's important in today's world, right?
I mean, given how polarized we are, when we can come together, we should.
And as Christians, we don't always, we don't want to be known as Christians by what we are always against. It's nice to be known by what we're for. That being said, I've often heard people levy the criticism at Christians that you're only known like that. Somehow being known by what you're against is a bad thing. I don't think that necessarily is what you want your entire character profile to be based on. I don't think it's a bad thing, though. Jesus was known by things that he was against, as well as by what he was for. The point is that there was a balance. Again, I don't see there being any problem with the world knowing what Christians are against. There are very hard moral positions that we need to take biblically, standing for the truth, walking, abiding in the truth, things that Jesus would hold us to, positions that we need to be known by. And if that happens to be against something that is a cultural norm, so be it. It's nice, though, from time to time also to take a moment and discuss things that you're for, and more particularly, things that you're for that you might be able to find a commonality, a common ground, a middle ground with a secular world that majority of the time is polarized and against you. So we started this conversation. Now, we absolutely plan today to get back to that subject matter. I will say up front that what was going to be one episode and then 2 episodes very likely will indeed be 3 episodes. So the likelihood of us actually getting to everything that I was planning to get to today is probably not going to happen. And if I can indulge you, Craig, can I explain why, kind of what happened today that kind of derailed a bit of my planning?
Yeah, I mean, it's your show. You can do what you want.
That's true. That's true. So one of the things that makes Outlaw Radio as a platform much different than what I do from the pulpit on Sunday mornings, again at Calvary 316. And Creighton, you can probably provide some insight. What 2 things are really different about this medium versus the way that I handle a pulpit on Sunday? And you've been with me. I mean, you were a middle schooler when I was a youth pastor. I mean, you've seen me throughout all the time. If you had two big differences, how would you qualify that?
The first is easy, and that would be and I can never remember the word. For 20 years I've been studying the Bible this way. The verse by verse teaching we don't necessarily do on the radio.
That's
we do a version of it.
That's absolutely true. Let me kind of pivot, because that would be the third, but not necessarily relevant, because that's not what the show's about. But in the way that I teach expositionally, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, I am not a winger. Like, I don't wing it on Sunday morning.
No, you're heavily scripted. Back when we had PowerPoints, was word for word the script that I had behind the computer.
So I teach roughly how long?
Between 45 and 50 minutes, depending on whether or not you get on a roll.
That's right. And I mean, sometimes even 55 minutes, but the entire sermon is, I would say, 95% scripted, even to the point that we have a very cool website, c316.tv, where we actually provide the sermon notes to our audience who shows up on Sunday saying, hey, you can follow along with the Bible study, with the belief that utilizing multiple senses helps people learn and retain. So in addition to hearing the Bible study and seeing certain things, you have touch, you have a tablet, we have tables set up in our sanctuary. We encourage people to actually read along. So the first big difference is that from the pulpit, I'm very scripted. And the reason for that is that I don't like diving down rabbit holes. I don't like running off on thought trails. I like staying very concise, particular. And if I get in trouble by something I say, I want to make sure that I was
It's always unscripted.
Well, no, No, that well, yeah, sometimes. But I want to make sure if I get in trouble substantively, that it's something I was very intentional by saying. Like, I can't fall back on why I misspoke. You saw it. I wrote it down. Now that helps that if I do say something that gets me in trouble that wasn't written down, I can say it was a lapse in judgment and
heat of the moment.
At heat of the moment, I got on a roll and I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. If it's written down and I'm in trouble, I made a point and I'm cool with standing by it. So Outlaw Radio, though, is very different, and you know that.
Well, yeah, it's very unscripted.
It is very, very much so unscripted. Some episodes, there is no script whatsoever. There's a thought. I have in my mind a good idea of what I want to talk about, but there's no script or order to the show. Now, what we're talking about political middle ground, and if you're watching on the live stream, you'll see this. There is like a one-page bullet point outline that kind of does direct some thoughts with the show. Gives me a direction, but that's about the extent of the Outlaw Radio show. I prefer it to be more of like the stream of my own consciousness, a rant, a freestyle. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And for those listening on the podcast or the radio, the piece of paper they held up kind of looks like the scribblings of a crazy person.
Because
like
it kind of is the scribblings of a crazy person. I don't teach on Sundays with notes like this. I teach with actual written sentences. The other thing that is starkly different between what I do from a pulpit and what I do from this particular microphone on the Outlaw Radio show would be what? And this really pertains to the subject matter.
According to some people, we do a lot more political here. We almost never talk politically from the pulpit.
In fact, I would say that I try to go out of my way. So certain things are have
Inherent.
to be said. Have to be said. If you're teaching through the Bible, you're presented with a concept. Again, we're teaching right now through the book of Revelation. Before that, the book of Daniel. We've been dealing with some prophecy, and if you're going to talk about prophecy, you actually have to place it within some context of things happening in your own world. So there are times that a political discourse or bringing up a moral example, whether it be transgenderism or homosexuality or just the perversions within our culture that we see with licentiousness, just pornography. Certain things have to be talked about if you're trying to present the Bible and make it relevant for folks. You've got to apply it to their world. But I go out of my way to not be political from the pulpit. I've never endorsed a candidate. I've talked about the benefits of one party over the other. I've mentioned things in the past, but I would say I'm kind of an equal opportunity offender. I have made fun of Obama in the past, or Biden, pointed out some moral flaws, but I equally made fun of Donald Trump when the moment presented itself. My point, so two big differences between what I do behind the pulpit, what I do behind this microphone is, one, the microphone is again kind of the free flow of consciousness, not as scripted. And the pulpit is very much scripted. It's really the articulation of the high regard and weight I carry the responsibility of expounding upon, teaching the Word of God. I mean, there's a big difference. It's a heavy thing that I carry. The other thing is that from the pulpit, I'm never political, but from this microphone, again, talking about relevant topics in an honest and genuine way, it necessitates that I'm probably more political. I bring all of that up in a very lengthy lead-in to say that today I was working on my Bible study. I know, again, if you're listening on the radio or the podcast, this is a little past tense. But I'm going to take a break from our travels through the book of Revelation, and I'm going to teach about Palm Sunday. I'm going to teach about the triumphal entry of Jesus, the implications, the significance of that day. Anyway, I had this really good thought for an introduction. I shared with you, right, Creighton, off air, beforehand, just a little bit about the intro.
Yes, it was very intriguing.
So it was a good intro. I felt good about it. But in the course of doing this intro, I kind of did go down a rabbit hole, and I got like 2 pages into these notes, and it dawned on me. It was like, I can't use these. I can't use any of this for the Bible study. This is a 2-page introduction on a 9-page Bible study. And when it doesn't have anything to do with Palm Sunday, that's code for not a good intro. So I had spent time working on this, like half a day. And so I copied pasted into a new document, deleted from the Bible study, and then spent the rest of the day on the rant that I was in. When we come back from the break, I am going to share with the audience my rant because I think it's relevant. And then with whatever time we have left, we're going to talk about more political points of middle ground. You with me?
Absolutely.
Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Outlaw Radio Show.
All right. So we have everyone say hi to Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer.
I need Jennifer to give me an update on Miss Roberta because I have not seen Miss Roberta in a couple months, which concerns me. And privately, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind, I just want to make sure she's well and healthy. So
the other comment we have is from Mike. And I think this is one there. I think he saw the title and responded, which if he did that, he might have then left during the intro. I'm not sure. Mike, if you're still here, this is this comment because I don't think he's necessarily wrong, but I think that it's interesting given what we actually talked about last week.
Okay.
So this is this comment. He says, there is no middle ground. There's political power. There's mob. There's Jesus. To be with the world is to be at odds with Christ.
Okay. I mean, again, I completely understand that particular sentiment. I mean, Nick and Darius or Derek, what's your reactions to that question?
I get where he's coming from because, I mean, as a Christian, you kind of take things and you feel like you have to look at things a specific way, like take abortion. Like, you know, how are we supposed to look at that? And obviously the left and the right have specific views on that and other stuff like that. So it's kind of like, okay, well, where's the middle ground for something like that? Whereas we're supposed to lead a life with Christ and love people and bring them to him, but also, you know, abide by who's above us right now.
I think you absolutely nailed it and touched on it. Mike, I would 100% agree. If you take the topic of abortion, where is the middle ground between not even just talking about secularists and Christians, but the Democrats and the Republicans? You have the Democratic Party that is in such embrace of abortion that they even adhere to and accept infanticide, not just late-term abortion, 9-month abortion. But even if a child is aborted and survives, that it's not provided HIPAA or
day one abortion.
Yeah, like day one abortion. Like it's like, where's the middle? Like if you hold the position that it's murder and you hold the position that it's not alive, like there is not a middle ground to that. Again, if you believe that marriage is defined as a heterosexual union for life between one man and one woman, again, male and female defined by the Bible. Where's the middle ground to our particular society? And I completely understand and agree with that. That kind of misses the point, though, of the conversation, because if you get into very specific issues, you're right. There isn't room for middle ground. What we're trying to do here in last week's episode, which I think illustrated it, and I think you guys would agree.
He did say that he missed last week.
Yes. Okay. So that was an example. And then later hopefully we'll get to some of it more today. What we're trying to do is to find some place where we can meet in the middle, like some areas where, you know, Christians can say, hey, I disagree with you on blah, 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 but okay, here's one thing that let's work together on. It's, can we find any of those particular areas? I will invert it. I don't think the left has done a whole lot. I don't think they did a whole lot to find any type of middle ground to work with Donald Trump or Trump supporters. Trump ran on an infrastructure bill, which the Democrats have been touting for years, or criminal justice reform that the Democrats have been touting for years, and the Democrats didn't work with him on either of those. So, you know, I understand the sentiment, but as Christians, you know, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount, I think this is a good segue, blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers. And as Christians, we should take that seriously. And instead of just always emphasizing where we'll never get along, which are real things, we should at least have a conversation. This is what we're trying to do on maybe areas where we can agree. And hopefully we'll get to more of those after I go on a rant. So you guys ready for my rant?
Yep.
I'm always ready for your rants.
Yeah,
I'm listening to them for 20 years.
I'm going to go on a rant. All right, you guys ready?
Yep.
All right, next block of audio is 12 minutes. Let's do it. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. I'm joined by Creighton, who is always here, sometimes heard.
And now I am heard.
And now he is heard. I set things up in the previous block about a bit of a rant that I'm going to go on. And so Creighton, you kind of have an idea of where I'm about to go. And the reason for this rant is mainly that I spent a lot of time today on it and decided it couldn't be in a Bible study. And so I decided to lead with it.
Yeah, no, this is going to be interesting. I got a pretty good idea. I haven't told you not to, so.
Well, even if you did, it wouldn't have mattered. So buckle with me. Let me give you a little context. So I'm working on a Palm Sunday message, the triumphal entry of Jesus, a day that changes history, a significant day in history, a day that everyone present, with the exception of Jesus, failed to see. And when we talk about days in history, there are days where the people living in that day have a full understanding that what they're living through in that 24-hour period will change the world forever. Creighton, a great example of that, you brought it up between blocks, would be
9/11.
9/11. You can also go, with the December 7th, a day that will live in infamy, where all those listening on the radio about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor knew the implications of what was about to happen. That being said, there are certain days that you only recognize their significance. Yes, they make an equal impact in the world, but you only really are able to see the significance of what happened on that day from hindsight, kind of retrospectively. So that was kind of the beginnings, the workings of my intro. That segued into a lengthy rant that needed to be removed, and I'm going to share it with you. So here goes. You ready, Creighton?
As ready as I'll ever be.
All right. So on Thursday morning, March 12th, 2020, everyone across the country, everyone woke up not fully understanding the significance of that day, March 12th, 2020, and what was about to happen. Now, news, to be fair, of a highly infectious coronavirus that had emerged in Wuhan, China, latter part of 2019, a virus that was spreading in some of the more urban centers of the United States. By this point, it had been largely downplayed by virtually everyone in the media for months, but maybe the exception of Fox News' Tucker Carlson. And in fact, in response to the President Trump, his preemptive measure at restricting travel into and out of China on February 2nd, again, 2020, and then declaring a public health emergency on the 3rd, just the next day, leadership within the Democratic Party, leaders like the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, or the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, even the presidential candidate at the time, Joe Biden, they were calling Trump's actions of restricting travel to China and declaring a public health emergency. They were describing, even at this point, these actions as being xenophobic. They were calling him a racist. And they were saying these things were unnecessary. I can recall a scene where Nancy Pelosi is actually in Chinatown celebrating the Chinese New Year, saying it's completely fine for crowds to gather, nothing to worry about here. Additionally, to just kind of highlight just the quick change in how everyone was viewing things, aside from the politics that were downplaying it, in the early months of 2020, you had the World Health Organization, known as the WHO. You had the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control, based here in Atlanta, Georgia. You had the NIH, the National Institute of Health. They also didn't really seem to be overly alarmed by what they were now calling, with a more official scientific title, COVID-19, a coronavirus, VI, dated 2019, because that was when it was discovered, COVID-19. In fact, in an interview given to Weekend Today on February 29th, the NIH director, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he cautioned Americans that there was no need for anyone to change their lifestyle because of the coronavirus. And in fact, similar sentiments were echoed by the WHO and the leaders of the CDC. Then in March 8th, 2020, in an interview he gave with 60 Minutes, Fauci later added, quote, "There's no reason to be walking around with a mask. When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. Again, he gave this interview with 60 Minutes on March 8th, and you got to follow the timeline a bit. You see, just a few days after that interview, things started to become more and more serious. On March 11th, despite their attempts to downplay the human-to-human spread, and despite of their attempts to free China of culpability or responsibility, or to mitigate growing fears globally, the WHO declared, they finally admitted, again, March 11th, 2020, that the spread of COVID-19 had indeed reached officially pandemic status. On Thursday, the 12th of March, things reached a fever pitch. And in just hours, worry of this deadly pandemic we had been hearing about on the news, downplayed by our leaders, started to sweep the nation like a tsunami. In fact, rumors were already circulating. If you recall that just the next day, on Friday, March 13th, the president was going to declare a national state of emergency and ban travel coming from Europe. You know, by the evening's end, the world as we knew it on that Thursday, March 12th, was rapidly changing. By the time that my head hit the pillow, after watching the wall-to-wall coverage in the wee hours of Friday morning, most of the major sports leagues had suspended play one day. Little leagues were postponed. Schools announced that they were closing for at least 2 weeks. Businesses instructed their employees to work from home. Those that couldn't shuttered. Even services that weekend canceled. Sunday services canceled as a precaution. I remember having these very relevant conversations with the elder board at Calvary 316, watching how all of this transpired. And as we all know, because we experienced it, I mean, Thursday, I went to a pizza joint after a baseball practice with two of my assistant coaches to set up our lineup for opening day on Saturday. And by the time we left the pizza joint, we all knew we would be lucky if we ever saw each other again and if there was ever going to be a baseball season. People panicked. I remember leaving this pizza joint, calling my wife and telling her to go to Publix immediately to get whatever we could. Thursday night, Friday, that weekend, a run on the groceries ensued. Shelves were emptied of the necessities: toilet paper, non-perishables. Gas futures, when the markets opened on Monday, plummeted. Stock market tumbled. Air travel screeched to a halt. There were cruise ships that were not allowed to port. International borders were closed. Even world governments adjourned normal operations for a period of time. And you know, the only solace that anyone had in the early days, that Thursday and Friday into the following week, was that our leaders, people that we trusted, people with multiple degrees, our leaders in health and science and epidemiology, leaders from, again, the NIH and the CDC, and those that were quickly promoted to positions of authority within the administration and their new coronavirus task force. They kept saying, and again, this was the only solace that anyone had, the only thing you could fall back on to not freak out, was that the drastic measures that were happening were only going to be necessary for a period of, and you'll smile when I say it, 15 days. Why? So we could flatten the curve. Why? So that we could limit the spread. Why? So that we could keep our hospitals from becoming overloaded. Why? So that we could hinder a spike in the fatality rates. Sadly, 15 days to flatten the curve would not be the first or the last thing that our trusted leaders would get so very wrong in the months that followed. And to be fair, and I should be fair, Creighton, I don't want to pile on. The old saying is true, right? The saying, hindsight is what?
50-50?
2020. 2020.
It's been a long day.
I throw it to you and you just muffed it.
Missed it?
The old saying is true. Hindsight is always 2020. It's much easier to see things with the clarity of 2020 vision. See?
Yes. Yeah, I understand now. I don't.
Backwards, back in time. So what I'm not trying to do right now is to, as they say, Monday morning quarterback it. Or in a more relevant context for me, I'm not trying to be a Monday morning preacher. Like the last pandemic, we should remember, occurred back in 1918. And I only believe, and Creighton, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that only Joe Biden was old enough to remember the Spanish flu.
Betty White.
Betty White. My point is that everyone involved with dealing with the virus, we're at a disadvantage. I mean, that's why we called it a novel virus. It was unusual. Mistakes were inevitable. Grace was warranted. But what I want to set the stage for is I really do wonder what our collective national reaction would have been if we knew on March 12th, 2020, what we know now. So there's the beginning, about half of it.
Up until you asked me a question, I thought it was going really well.
50-50. No one has the vision.
Man, I'm seeing 50-50 right now. That's great.
Know, man, I get the vision of an owl.
You know what the worst part about it is I have a distinct memory on January 1st of 2020, Derek making that joke 15 times.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. I can see 2020. It was perfect vision.
That was your joke?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Is that the joke that Darius would have, or is that just
really good
joke?
Right now? It's like I'm seeing 2020.
No, the Darius joke is I'm seeing 2021 is slightly better than last year.
No, this year, like one eye is just a little bit off. It's like I'm seeing 2021. I don't know what's going on right now. It's really weird.
I'm really upset. I'm really upset that I biffed that.
Yeah.
You did.
50,
No, you
50,
totally biffed it. No, there's no question about it.
I said that joke. How many times did you say I said
like
it?
15.
Yeah. 2020. I'm seeing 2020. My peripherals are real good, though. I'll tell you what.
I'm seeing 2020, but I got astigmatism.
It makes it 50-50. Hey.
It makes it 50-50.
No. Knock on something. I don't have any stigmatisms right now.
Right now? Did you have them before?
No.
Let me.
Yeah, they all went away last year. I was seeing 2020.
Let me go ahead and just dive back.
Yes, please.
All right, 3. We ready?
11 minutes, right?
Yep. 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. I know that today's episode has been branded political middle ground, and Creighton, we might get to some of that to build off of the last episode.
My guess is we won't, but I'll believe in you.
And if we don't, that's okay, because it's a weekly show, so we can
do it next week.
We can easily punt to next week, and that'd be all right. I kind of left things off with a question, and that is the fact that I really do wonder. It's been a year since the world changed, and maybe it's just the nature of being introspective, considering things, looking back over the last year. I really wonder. It's a question that I want to kind of hang out there. What our collective national reaction would have been if we knew on Thursday, March 12th, 2020, when the world screeched to a halt, what we know now. And again, we can talk about it from a broad term, national, collective conscious. I want to try to bring it home individually. Like, personally, you were in a unique situation that weekend. You want to tell the audience kind of what happened, like what your context was?
Yeah, while you were at baseball practice and subsequently the pizzeria, I was on a mountain camping. We had spotty cell signals, so like while you were making that decision with the with your baseball coaches, I was getting intermittent texts from you and the other elders about whether or not we were going to have church on Sunday and whether or not we're going to have church for the next however long we were going to do it. I don't know what we were talking about at the time, but we literally went up the mountain thinking the world was like, oh, this coronavirus might be a thing. And we came back down and the world was in flames.
Was in total flames. Now, again, I just want, as you listen to, because you're kind of the resident audience member, as you listen to the next segment here, I want you to try to internalize it. Like if you knew driving off of that mountain, if you knew then what you know now, what kind of an impact would that have made? And I'm going to kind of set this up. Let me give a few examples. Like, what if we knew that the social distancing and lockdown measures, what if we knew on March 12th, 2020, that they would remain in place well into 2021? Like, would that have changed our perspective? Like, what if we had known that the power that many of our state and local leaders discovered, that they could amass, how much power they could amass using a public health emergency, power that would go unchecked by the judicial branch, that they could revoke many of the constitutional rights that we've taken for granted? Like, would we have had the same reaction on March 12th, 2020 if we known that was in the deck? Like, what if we had known that in the course of dealing with a pandemic, that we would see in the process gym owners arrested, or restaurateurs jailed, or pastors who would dare to hold indoor services fined? There's a pastor right now in Canada that is in prison because he reopened his church. Like, what if we had known in March 12th of 2020 that a failure to wear your mask into a Bank of America in Texas that doesn't have a mask mandate could lead to you being tasered and taken away in cuffs? Would we have been okay with it? Like, what if we had known on March 12th, 2020, that the actions of our leaders in response to this pandemic would end up resulting in the economy of middle America being completely and utterly crushed? That the second quarter GDP in 2020 would decrease 34.3%, something that has never happened in the history of our country. That over the course of the next year, an astounding 80 million people would file for unemployment, and that we would lose at a minimum 100,000 small businesses for no other reason than they were deemed by the state to be non-essential, while megacorps like Amazon and Home Depot and Walmart and Target and UPS and the grocery stores and food delivery apps would not only remain open for business, but see their stock value and their market shares double? Would you have been okay with that? Like, what if we had known that the policies that we all went along with back in March and April of 2020 would end up forcing our nation into a situation where we would have to print $4 trillion in stimulus to avoid a depression, while the collective wealth of the billionaire class would increase over the same time period 44%? Would you be okay with that? Like, what if you knew the only national GDP in 2020 to experience any type of growth would be China, the country in which this virus had originated? What if you had known back on March 12th, 2020, that there would be a mass exodus of residents from blue to red states, from the cities to the suburbs? What if you had known that from our reaction to a pandemic and the years to come, hyperinflation was a near reality? Like, what if we had known that a year later, a whole segment of our children, a whole group of kids in our society, completely and utterly dependent upon public education because they exist in minority communities or they're generally lower class, would only have a year later the option for digital learning, which, you know, is great when you don't have broadband internet or a computer to do it on. Like, how would you feel if you knew an entire year later that the mental health issues that would result for our children would skyrocket, with suicides in the same demographic reaching numbers we've never, ever seen before in the history of our country? What if I told you a year later sports would resume, but that stadiums would still remain empty? That masks and even double masking would become mandated. And that 50%, a year later, 50% of Christians either no longer see any type of value in Christian community or are still too afraid to attend church in person. If I had told you that March 12th of 2020, that a year later, half of the church would still not be in in-person services, you'd think I was nuts. Like I wonder what our reaction would have been if we knew on Thursday, March 12th of 2020, that the pandemic that we were in the early days of experiencing was going to end up becoming such a political force that it would be a tool to push the majority party out of office in the November elections. What if I had told you that red states and blue states would implement radically different policies? What if I had told you that the real need to provide financial relief to hurting Americans would end up becoming the Trojan horse by which Democrats would pass massive spending, where only 9% of the $2 trillion allocated ends up being separated for the pandemic? Like, what if you knew in March that everything you had just been told, everything you had been told to justify everything that was being done, what if you knew then that none of it played out like they said? Let me think about that for a moment, Creighton. Like, what if you knew March 12th of 2020, if everything you were being told by the scientists we were instructed to trust had been and would be proven to be wrong?
I mean, I probably would have stayed on the mountain, but I also definitely wouldn't have bought a mask.
I think the vast majority of Americans, knowing then what we know now, would have had a much different reaction. I don't have this in my notes, but I know, again, if you were listening to the Outlaw Radio Show, the early days of this pandemic, I was concerned about it. Again, if you just ran the simple maths, I mean, they were saying up front that the fatality rate would be anywhere between 4 and 2%. And when you play out the numbers of something that's highly infectious, you equate maybe the same numbers to the Spanish flu. Interestingly enough, this is a virus that's more like the cold than the flu, but that's neither here nor there. The idea of just those particular numbers, and then you extrapolated them out, I mean, you're realistically looking at millions of people dying globally.
Wasn't the original prediction 2 million people in America alone?
And when you're told that, you take a step back and there's room for cause. Don't go anywhere. We're going to continue these thoughts here on the Outlaw Radio Show. Man, I almost made a total rookie mistake. I almost blew that.
Yeah, that was real close to the wire.
No, I had actually in my mind that I was still in the second block.
Kept going for another.
I'm sitting there looking at my notes, and I'm like, man, I'm actually going to get to some of the subject matter because I'm almost done. I'm like halfway through the show. This will be great. And then I look over. I've got, if you don't see it, I've got a monitor where the audio is recording here. And I'm looking over. I'm like, oh no, we're definitely
We're
in the
in third block.
11 minutes. So I've got 9 minutes to finish this up. But we're not going to get to the subject matter. I think that's probably a given. But this show beginning to round into shape. You guys starting to see where I'm headed.
Yeah. So I was gonna say. I mean, what was I gonna say? So you kept asking if we would have known, if we would have known, if we would have known, if we would have known. I don't think there would have been any fear. And I think fear is what based most of the population about how they dealt with this.
Okay.
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. And where the next block's going to land, like where all this is headed, is the idea of like, if you say, wait a second, yeah, I would have reacted much differently then if I knew what I know now. But your behavior hasn't changed at all, which half the country still fits in that dynamic. That's what I'm trying to highlight. Like, wait a second. After all of this, if you're like, no, I would have totally done something different, then why aren't you doing it now?
Yeah. Because the fear's gone.
Because the fear should be gone.
That actually feeds into a comment we have from all of our favorite Parkin, Larry.
By
way of Kelly.
Larry Parkin by way of Kelly.
The boy.
Yes, all of our favorite Parkins, all three of us.
Actually, you're on the island by yourself. Mine's Leslie. So is Nick's.
Good choice.
So is Nick's.
Yeah.
His wife, Nick's wife is no longer a Parkin. She's a Monty. So Nick's favorite Parkin is definitely Leslie as well.
I always forget she's not a Parkin anymore. Anyway,
so what's the comment or question?
The comment is there will be two truths, two different types of media that are presented their own truth 180 degrees away from each other. And it's all about which one you watch, which actually goes into your final point, which it took me some texting back and forth with Kelly to understand what he meant. But basically he's saying is that if we did know in March what we know now, is you would have the divide would be one part of the media would be telling you one thing based on the information, and the other side would be telling you something else based on the information, and they'd be diametrically opposed, which is exactly where we are now.
Well, I'll tell you what's actually interesting about where we are now is that we have a media completely ignoring the story altogether. Have you noticed that like CNN's not talking about the pandemic, Fox News is not talking about the pandemic, MSNBC is not talking about the pandemic. Matter of fact, when Joe Biden took office, the COVID tracker on CNN went down.
Of course, because it's not making the money anymore.
Wait, like went down, like
it's not getting votes.
The ultimate number went down, or the actual whole
they
thing
removed the whole thing.
Yeah.
They removed the whole thing because they were able to use it for what they wanted to. You know today that
they don't need to. They don't need to track it anymore.
It's hard. Listen, I've done what I could to not be conspiratorial. It's not my nature. I'm not one of those people where I just automatically gravitate to global conspiracy. To me, it's crazy that the only country on the planet whose GDP increased in 2020 was China, and that there wasn't something strategic behind what happened.
Yeah, I read somewhere the other day they built a giant navy in the past few months, which is interesting.
Hey, one of my predictions is that Taiwan is on the
chopping block.
Yes. Let me go ahead and let's finish out the
Bezos
episode, and then we can talk a little bit more. You guys cool?
Yeah,
That's good.
Let's go.
Yeah, let's
All
do
right,
it.
final block 9:45. We need a big clock so that I know every time. All right, let's do this.
And just beep.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome back to the Outlaw Radio Show. Creighton, thank you so much for being with me.
It is always a pleasure.
I know you were not on the show much with this episode. I'm kind of on a rant, but roll with me. At the end, I want your thoughts on it all.
Absolutely. I'll try not to biff it.
So where I've been leading lands on this idea that if you had known back in March of 2020, everything you know now, which includes that everything that you had been told to justify everything that was being done didn't play out like it was said to, would you have handled it differently? And in some ways, and off air again, we live stream the recording of the Outlaw Radio Show 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights. During the break, Nick, who's one of the guys in the studio, brought up just the fear component. I mean, the question is if you knew in March of 2020 what you know in March of 2021, would you have been afraid? Like, would you have been driven by fear? Like, what if you knew that none of the health measures that we were told were absolutely critical to stopping the spread of the virus worked? Like, what if you knew that states that locked down and issued mask mandates and those that remain completely opened, California versus Florida, remained open with no mask requirements, have virtually the same numbers a year later? Would that have impacted your perspective? Like, what if you knew that the same scientific experts that crushed schools and indoor dining, that those same people failed to implement any type of meaningful policy to protect the most vulnerable elderly population in our nursing homes? Would it give you rise for suspect? Like, what if you knew that the same experts, again, would claim that the thousands of people who hit the streets in cities across America this summer in protest, or more recently, the untested masses of illegal immigrants crossing our southern border who are not being tested for coronavirus, really don't have any impact on spreading the virus? All the while, the 10 people gathered in a church to worship God constitutes as a potential hotspot. Would you have taken any of those people seriously if you had known the hypocrisy in it all? Like, what if you knew the scientists we were commanded to obey would eventually flip-flop on almost everything they said in March of 2020? From the coronavirus being airborne or human-to-human spread, or how long it remains alive on surfaces. Remember when we were washing down Amazon boxes? Or the need to use antibacterial soap, when it's a virus? Or to the efficacy of masks? Or remember, we need to remain 6 feet apart, but now it's 3 feet, you'll be fine. Well, wait a second. Like what if you knew in March of 2020 that any dissenting opinion or scientific study contrary to the accepted orthodoxy would be systematically purged and censored by big tech? How would you feel? Would you think that you were being played? Like, again, what I really wonder, what our reaction would have been if we knew all the way back on March 12th, 2020, that in spite of all of the things I've already mentioned, what if I had told you on March 12th, Back to the Future, if I had told you, hey, don't worry. Yeah, all the strategies fail and everything they're telling you won't work out. But in spite of all of that, hospital capacities will be able to endure incredible inflated infection rates. In fact, the temporary medical facilities that get put up in civic centers or on actual ships run into heart, they'll be unused. What if I told you, hey, don't worry, we'll develop a vaccine in record time? What if I told you that while the death toll would reach 500,000, again, way under the mark of what was predicted, the fatality rate would only be 0.018%? Would you have been afraid? Like what if you knew in March of 2020 that the overwhelming majority of people under the age of 75 actually have a greater health risk from the seasonal flu than this coronavirus? Would that have changed the way you handled things? Like what if you knew our solution to this health crisis in turn probably will result and a much larger health crisis, as history will show when the studies are conducted, that more people ended up dying from not being able to receive normal health screenings for cancer or heart disease than actually died from the pandemic. Will that have changed your mind? Would you have handled things differently if you had known the fatality rate for children age 0 to 19 would be 0.00003%? That is 3 deaths out of 10,000 infections. That more children would die in 2020 from suicide than COVID-19. Would have changed your perspective if you knew that there's little to no evidence that kids actually spread the disease to adults? Why are schools closed at all? Like, this is not to minimize the deaths that are attributed to COVID-19. Like, any loss of life is tragic. In fact, a dear brother of mine lost his father through this pandemic, and it was heartbreaking. My point, though, is that while today we know what we assumed this time last year, that this is a highly infectious virus that disproportionately affects the elderly, those with an underlying comorbidity, or the obese, I do think that it's time that we as a society kind of take a step back and not cast blame, but maybe just reconsider our approach and if there is anything to be afraid of. Again, knowing what you know now, are you okay with the way it's all played out? And if your answer to this question is no, I'm not actually, but you're still going with the flow, I just ask, maybe you should consider a new approach. So, Creighton, with a few minutes that we have left, what are your thoughts?
It's interesting because given, like, really the only thing that changed in my life was those first 3 months or whatever where we stopped having church, and it didn't really change that much in my life because all that it changed was how many people were at the church when I got up and went there to do service.
And it helps that you work at what is constituted as an essential business. So you had a paycheck.
My workflow, my paychecks didn't change.
And you live in a state that didn't have a mask mandate and allowed the economy, like we didn't shut down or lock down. We reopened April 30th.
Right. And I could still go to restaurants. So my life didn't really change, but I'm also not necessarily going with the flow. I'd love to hear from anybody out there who lives in a state where it, like, they actually had a lockdown.
Or still have them. They're still in effect in California and in other states.
Where it's like they literally can't. Like, I know people who haven't left the house or haven't, like, really left the house since March of 2020.
Their life hasn't normalized.
I don't know how I would probably end up doing something self-harming crazily. Like, I could not be alone that long. I don't know how they made it.
Hey, man, thank you for your perspective and insight. You've been listening to the Outlaw Radio Show. If you like what you heard, I encourage you to contact your local Christian radio station. Let them know that you're thankful that they're carrying this type of programming and your community. I do want to say, especially with an episode that contained the subject matter of today, and we'll get to the political middle ground. We'll get to part 2 next week. But we would love to hear from you. I echo what Creighton said. We'd love to hear from you, the audience. I'd love your testimonials, your perspective, what you've gone through. All of our contact information you can find at outlawradio.org. Our email is info@outlawradio.org, facebook.com/the Radio Outlaw. Our Twitter handle is @radio_outlaw. All the stuff you can find, again, at outlawradio.org. I do encourage you, again, if you're listening on radio or podcast Apple, Google, Spotify, check us out. We live stream 8 p.m. Wednesday nights, outlawradio.live. Again, I'm Zach Adams. I hope you join me this time next week for more of the Outlaw Radio Show. Fellas, you got anything?
Yeah, I got a paragraph I wrote.
You got a paragraph?
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to read inspired by a rant.
I got inspired by a rant. I'm just going to read it from what I wrote.
Okay.
So this is just, I said, I feel like the people that would not change the way that they acted, that knew everything now that they didn't before, are people that just believe what the world tells them is true. Like, they believe this world has them protected. and people in authority have their best interest in mind when this world is only full of sin and trying to destroy you.
I totally understand that sentiment. I would only caution, just because I know people that fit into the category that we're discussing. I don't think that they're driven by fear. I don't think that their motivation is, placing trust in a worldly system. Like, I know people that are still in quarantine because, okay, one lady is during all of this, her mother was diagnosed with like stage 4 cancer and was going through heavy doses of chemotherapy. And even to this day, she is remaining quarantined because she's the main caregiver of her mother. And truth, if her mother were to catch the coronavirus with a weakened immune system, it would be devastating. Again, I wouldn't, I don't think that person's being driven by fear.
No, and see, that's where I think where my statement is broad.
Yes,
and
yes.
I'm not
The vast
trying to
majority
direct
of
vast
people, not
majority of people,
specific people.
the world,
Yeah.
not specific people. Because if my father had stage 4 cancer, I would do the same thing. I'd protect myself. I would do that because you have to care for others. But I think a lot of people that don't have that are still acting in a certain way because the world's telling them
But
to.
could she not still get the flu? Could she not still get pneumonia somehow? Could she not still get a stomach virus that it would impair her system? I mean, could she not get anything that would
Yeah, but I
impair
mean,
her
when you're
system?
dealing with immunosuppression, which is what chemotherapy
you're always going to
is.
protect
Yeah.
your means no matter what.
But
What
to
it
Derek-
That's
comes
what
to.
I'm saying. Like, no, okay, well, it's all or nothing. It's like, okay, COVID's a new thing, and like, yeah, it's gonna hurt you. Like, if you already have situations going on, but it's like, okay, if we're worried about COVID, then you have to be worried about everything.
And I'm sure there's people out there that are worried about everything, that have someone that they care about that is in intensive care or something, that, oh, I'm not going near them because I might have the cold, or I'm not going near them and they're taking the
Yeah,
extra
exactly.
precautions. And those are the outliners.
Yeah, so it's not just COVID. Then you got to be worried about everything.
Yeah. And I mean, COVID just is another step
Yeah.
on top of
And-
it.
And I mean, it's not like she's eating vats of, I don't know. I tried to think of another.
Yeah.
That-
Like
but to-
regular
I'm saying.
flu
So, like-
and being like, oh, but I'm not going to give
Yeah,
my grandmother
yeah,
COVID.
it's
what I'm
not
saying.
like
So-
they're-
she's
it's
she's
not like they're
she's
only caring
quarantining
about
herself.
COVID.
to Derek's point, I will add that I think where there is truth that people need to consider is the all or nothing. Like,
No,
you
for
can do
sure.
everything to love and to care for and to protect and cherish and fulfill your responsibilities. We live in a fallen world, and a fallen world that, as a consequence of sin, there are diseases and we're all going to die. And we're all going to die from something. You can do everything you can. You can't protect her from getting a heart attack, or yourself from getting a heart attack, or for you to just pick up something because it's a fallen world. You could die before she dies. Like, I mean, and I think that's where there is truth. And I think where you're trying to get to is like, it's the all or nothing mantra when you're living in a fallen world. Like, you can operate, wisely and prudently, but is that really what's going on in a lot of people's instances? I will say, and this will throw a wrinkle into the whole conversation. But I haven't brought this up. I think we did maybe an episode early in the year about the judgment of God. But there's a story where King David decides to number the people, which was something he was specifically told not to do. God said not to number the people. David decided to number the people anyway. And in the city of Jerusalem, there was a plague. Like, a plague broke out, right?
Right, and the plague is just an old school word for a pandemic.
Pandemic. Pandemic. People are getting sick and dying, and it was infectious and contagious, and it was spreading. It was a practical judgment of God, because David had done what he had been instructed not to do. And when David realizes this and he repents and whatnot, there's a scene where he actually sees where the pandemic was originating. And it was an angel that was actually inflicting the pandemic as a judgment of God. And that when David repented, the angel stopped the infection. And to me, it's like, you see a lot of things that are happening in America. Like, again, I'm not saying this is the judgment of God or any of that per se, other than, Like our job. Here's the way I'll couch it. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, if I've got to sacrifice a year of my life to quarantine, and in doing so protect my parents, I'll sacrifice that. We should all sacrifice that." Like, well, a year of your life as opposed to a year of my life is different. You don't have kids. I do. I'm going to sacrifice a year of memories that I only have so many years of them. Like people have different contexts. How old you are determines how much value a year has. But from a bigger context is like, wait a second. Like you are sacrificing a year of why you're here, because you're not here to make money. You're not here for any other reason. You're not here to even be worried about death or the death of others, especially if they're believers. Like your only job here, you've been created and redeemed, bought by the blood of Christ, and left here for one reason. And that is to be the salt and the light of the earth. It's to be part of the Great Commission. It's to tell people about Jesus and be a witness. To me, if you are in full quarantine, if you're like, I would just ask them, are you fulfilling God's Great Commission? Like, in what way are you witnessing to anyone? Like, how are you doing it? Like in other pandemics throughout the world, go back to the Black Plague, or more recently,
Spanish flu,
the Spanish flu, or even that, like Mother Teresa, her whole ministry was in a leper colony. Like when there have been pandemics, you know who rushes to the front lines because they don't care about their lives?
Who's supposed to?
It's been Christians who are not worried about their own life. They're worried about caring for those that are dying. Well, Zach, we're caring for people. Okay, so someone survives the pandemic and dies and goes to hell because you remain social. Like, we're not created to be socially distanced. And as Christians, I don't know how we fulfill our Great Commission. Digital church is not church. Like,
Amen.
I don't know how many people have gotten saved because of the sermons I'm putting on the internet. I hope some. I doubt it. I don't know, but I can tell you how many people have gotten saved because of conversations I've had with them personally in my driveway.
Yep.
One-on-one connections, looking someone eye to eye, giving them a hug when they're broken. Again, human contact is something we've missed. Something we're seeing the consequences of within our society. You guys, anything to add before we bounce, before we dip? Any other comments? Anything added?
I got a couple. Mike did send a second comment right after we started the second block.
Is this a Mike I know?
I don't know. It's Mike Zeke. I don't know.
Okay, I don't know. So it's fine.
I hope you don't mind me saying your last name. You're commenting with it on YouTube, so
so it's out there.
Yeah. He asked if there was peace outside of Christ, which has context, 45 minutes ago, and I just didn't have a chance to say it. Basically, I would just say, I think you're missing what we mean when we say common ground. Go watch the episode from last week, and hopefully the episode next week if we get to it.
We will get to it at some point eventually.
Yeah,
Part
definitely
3,
go watch the
part
episode
4.
last week. So you can kind of get an idea of what we mean, because we're not talking about making like moral common ground.
Man, you know what episode I would even encourage you that I think would play to what you're saying, Mike, is to go back to the episode even before that about marriage and divorce.
For sure.
Because when we talk about marriage and divorce, like the common ground is like, well, wait a second, you have a secular definition and a religious definition. Like there is no commonality, which then kind of parses the entire way we deal with the topic. To your question about, is there peace outside of Jesus? Absolutely not. There is, you do not have the peace of God apart from having peace with God. And there is no peace with God apart from Jesus. That's black and white, cut and dry. That's truth versus the lie. But again, like if we're talking about the Democrats wanting to make Washington, D.C. a state, as a Christian, I can say, well, their argument is taxation without representation. So we should just eliminate their federal income tax. And I think there's a middle ground. You don't have to be a state. Just don't pay taxes. like again, as a Christian, it's like, blessed are the peacemakers. Politically speaking.
But right, that's an amoral topic. It's not Jesus may care about whether it be a state, but I doubt it.
Oh, I don't think he could care at all.
I don't think he cares.
I don't think he cares whatsoever.
No.
But okay, so I get what he's saying.
Oh yeah.
About blessed are the peacemakers. There's a difference between peacemaker in the temporal sense and peace in the eternal sense.
Agreed.
And that's kind of the unique qualification. When it talks about eternal peace, the restlessness of the human soul, there is no peace.
Jesus Christ.
There is no peace apart from a relationship with Jesus Christ. So,
also shout out to Pastor Bob. He said that apparently Trump is starting a social media company, so we're going to move Outlaw Radio over there at some point. And he also said that he's been witnessing on Facebook, which is awesome because Pastor Bob is wonderful.
That's great.
well, listen, I got to go. I got something that just popped up. You guys be good. I'm going to roll some music. You guys say what you want to. God bless.
See y'all.
Bye.